animated scheme of sagittal section of the peritoneal cavity. First of all, the picture from textbook of V.Изранов Sapin concerning the sagittal section of peritoneal cavity. Practically the same picture you can find in textbook of previous. And now we shall try together to draw this picture step by step. First of all, let us begin from the drawing the outline of our body. So you can recognize anterior wall of the body. This is place of the umbilicus or umbo. This is the back. Now you can see the spinal column and inside of it vertebral canal. Now sternum, which consists of two parts here, manubrium sterni and corpus sterni. Processus xiphoidus isn't shown. Now the symphysis pubica, the place where two coxal bones gathered with each other. And now elements of reproductive system, and you can distinguish that it's picture of male, and especially we shall demonstrate the testes, because testis is placed inside of the scrotum and is covered by one of sheets, serous sheet, which is part of the peritoneal body, which was separated from the general peritoneal body before the birth of the child. And now, very important question, according the difference between the terms abdominal cavity and peritoneal cavity. It isn't the same. It's different terms. And we shall begin from term abdominal cavity. Abdominal cavity is large cavity inside of our body, which placed between several walls. First wall is abdominal wall. Here it is. It's schematic representation of abdominal muscles. Really, you understand that if we make sagittal view, this should be linea alba. That means tendinous part of the abdominal wall, not muscle part. But to easy recognizing, I made it of red color to understand that this is anterior abdominal wall. Now, superior abdominal wall. What is it? Diaphragm. Diaphragm, which separates the abdominal cavity and thoracic cavity. That means general cavity of the body by means of diaphragm is divided into two separate cavities, abdominal and thoracic cavity. And now, what is now? Inferior wall. This is muscle which is inside of the pelvis and separate the abdominal cavity from the external environment. This is diaphragm of pelvis, and we understand that it's inferior wall of the abdominal cavity. So inside of this part of the body, abdominal cavity is large space which can fulfill 10 or 15 or 20 liters of volume, depending from the constitution, from the large or small tail of the person, and so on. So abdominal cavity is the space which is inside of the body and which serves for placing the internal organs, and which is defined by the abdominal walls. So there are 4 abdominal walls: anterior, posterior. Here will be columna vertebralis and posterior muscles of the abdominal cavity, quadratus lumborum, psoas major. Superior, diaphragm, and inferior, diaphragm of the pelvis. So all this space is abdominal cavity, but not peritoneal cavity. About peritoneal cavity, several minutes later. And now, what organs shall we draw inside of abdominal cavity? First of all, liver. Here it is. But it's interesting now that liver is drawn like flying inside space. No one structure held it. So it's necessary to find what structure shall place it in this position. It will be peritoneum. Now, number 1, what is it? On the posterior wall of abdominal cavity, quite deep from the anterior surface, practically it lies on the vertebral column of the bodies of the vertebral column. So it's pancreas. Then under the liver we can find this structure, this hollow organ. Inside of it there is also cavity, so it is a part of alimentary canal. What is it? Sure, it's ventriculus zoogaster. It is under the liver. It's lower than liver, placed inside of the abdominal cavity. And then a lot of loops of the intestine. Number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. What are they? Number 3, pars horizontalis duodeni. You can understand that it placed under the pancreas. Practically it's placed on the bodies of the vertebra and also quite deep in abdominal cavity, on the posterior wall of abdominal cavity. Number 4, what is it? It's colon transversum. It's mistake here. Letter C, it isn't necessary. Colon transversum. Number 5, intestinum mesenteriale. Here it is number 5. Here it is number 5. All these loops are loops of intestinum mesenteriale. So later we shall draw the mesenterium, which hold all these loops of the intestinum tenue. Number 6, here it is, colon sigmoideum. Colon sigmoideum, pars of large intestine. And what is it now? Number 7, what is it? Sure, it's rectum. So we have drawn all the loops of large and small intestine, which could be found if you make a sagittal section of peritoneal cavity. But just now, in our picture, there is no depicted peritoneum. It isn't seen except the peritoneal sheet inside of scrotum, peritoneal sheet of testis. So we can remember that peritoneum is one of serous sheet in our organism, and they have parietal and visceral part. Now you can see this blue line This blue line is parietal part of peritoneum, of serous sheet of abdomen. It covered it from inside posteriorly the anterior abdominal wall and diaphragm. So they are paries That means parietal sheet of peritoneum. Then I use green color. This green color you can find, it should be cover the liver. This blue color became green in this place. So green color means visceral sheet of the peritoneum. Now we covered the diaphragmal surface of the liver, and now we can understand that number 8 is ligamentum coronarium hepatis, the place of transition. Excuse me, it's also mistakes. Transition of parietal layer of peritoneum to the visceral layer. So number 8 is ligamentum coronarium hepatis. For us, it's quite important that in our specimen we can find this place. We can put here our hand and to feel that our fingers will be in this place, will be touch ligamentum coronarium hepatis. We can't see it because it's placed quite deep, but we can touch it. Then we shall continue our green line here. This is visceral surface of the liver. So this sheet also is visceral peritoneum, peritoneum viscerale, and this place is place of porta hepatis. And I'd like you distinguish that from porta hepatis two sheets together come to the gaster. From porta hepatis, two visceral layers perform so named omentum minus. This is ligamentum hepatogastricum, and as a result, the gaster, the stomach, is related to the peritoneum intraperitoneally. So number 9, it's ligamentum hepatogastricum. Ligamentum hepatogastricum is duplication of the peritoneum which perform the function of stomach mesenterium. Excuse me, it's again mistake, mesenterium it should be written. And now what we shall draw from curvatura ventriculi major two sheets of visceral peritoneum passes down and then again return to the stomach. So we can find here four sheets of the peritoneum. What is it? Sure, it's omentum majus. Omentum majus. And this part consists of four peritoneal layers. Number 10, omentum majus, or greater omentum, freely hanging part of the greater omentum majus. So four peritoneal layers. Do you understand why? Because two of them was hanging freely, being directed downward, and then two of them was directed upward, and together there are four layers. And now, very interesting situation. Can you distinguish? Posterior two layers of omentum majus close to the posterior surface of abdominal cavity again became a parietal sheet, parietal peritoneum, again the blue line. Why? Because it will cover the posterior wall of the peritoneum. And they close this space which is connected with another part of peritoneal cavity through this small opening. This opening, number 11, is foramen epiploicum. Foramen epiploicum, the entrance into the cavity of omentum minus sec. So this is a special opening, foramen epiploicum, which connects the general peritoneal cavity and so named sac of omental cavity. Then I again breathe the blue line which cover the posterior wall of abdominal cavity. That means it was parietal sheet, and then it begins green because here it became a visceral sheet. So these two layers, parts of visceral sheets, they are mesenterium. they hold each loop of the intestinum tenor and fulfill the function of moving. It's possible to move all this loop to the different direction, to the left, to the right, because of this mesenterium. Very interesting that when we covered all the loops of large and small intestine, again, I'd like to show it. You can find here another two layers structure. What is it? Number 12. It's mesocolon transversum. You know that mesocolon transversum is also two-layer structure of peritoneum, which held the colon transversum. And again, in the lower part of peritoneal cavity, number 13, it's mesocolon sigmoidum. So, it's quite clear that each of these structures, mesocolon transversum, mesocolon sigmoidum, mesenterium, all they are two layers structures for holding the loops of the intestine in the space. And now number 14. What is it? You can say it's a parietal part of peritoneum. No, this is urinary bladder. That's why this sheet of peritoneum is green. It's visceral part of peritoneum. And now we can see that inside of abdominal cavity is placed a very narrow space of peritoneal cavity. So, we can say that peritoneal cavity is a narrow space between loops of the intestine, between parietal and visceral layers of the peritoneum. So, very narrow space inside of abdominal cavity. And in norm, this space consists of 50 milliliters of serous fluid. In norm, only 30 or 50 milliliters of fluid. But in pathological conditions, for example, in cirrhosis of the liver, for example, in canceromatosis of the peritoneum, malignant tumors of abdominal cavity, here inside of the peritoneal cavity, sometimes we can find 2, 3, 5 or more liters of the fluid, which is pathological fluid. This pathology called ascites, in Latin ascit. Ascites is pathology when a large amount of the pathological fluid is placed inside of the 2 layers of peritoneal cavity, between the parietal and visceral layers, or between 2 visceral layers. So, again, in norm, only 30 or 50 milliliters, only to provide possibility to easily move of one loop according to other. But in pathological conditions, sometimes several liters of ascitic liquid. So we have drawn this picture, and we should understand the main idea of it, that peritoneum as a serous sheet of abdomen covered all the organs of abdominal cavity in different ways, or intraperitoneally like intestinum mesenteriale, or mesoperitoneally like urinary bladder or liver, or extraperitoneally like horizontal part of duodenum and pancreas. But peritoneum itself as a serous sheet is a continuous sheet which passes through one organ to another, and practically we artificially distinguish 2 parts of it. The green one, visceral part or visceral sheet, visceral peritoneum, and blue one, the parietal peritoneum, peritoneum parietale. And practically the peritoneal cavity is hermetically closed in male, but in female, peritoneal cavity has 2 small openings which connects it with the external environment through the uterine tubes. So you can understand that in female the danger of inflammatory diseases of peritoneum is more serious than in male, without any injury, without any wound which can be destroy the wall of the abdominal cavity. And when we understand the all details in this picture, let us look at another picture. What is it? It's transverse section of peritoneal cavity. And now we can understand that again there is parietal part and there is visceral part of the peritoneum. They passes through each other and make peritoneal cavity as a hermetical cavity inside of abdominal cavity. So the definition of abdominal cavity is more general than definition of peritoneal cavity. It's very important. Thank you.